The air in the suburbs of Maryland always smelled a certain way on a Sunday in June. It was a mixture of freshly mown tall fescue grass, the metallic tang of garden hoses, and the heavy, sweet scent of blooming honeysuckle. But for Marley, today the dominant scent was hickory smoke and her signature dry rub, a secret blend of smoked paprika, brown sugar, and a hint of cayenne that had been passed down from her grandmother in South Carolina. At 62, Marley moved with a grace that defied the ache in her knees, a souvenir from 32 years of double shifts as a registered nurse. Her skin, the color of deeply roasted coffee beans, was smooth, though the fine lines around her eyes told the story of 1,000 smiles given to patients who had no one else. She stood in her kitchen, well, it was technically Carl and Jody's kitchen now, arranging the St. Louis-style ribs on a massive platter. She had paid the $40,000 down payment for this house 3 years ago. She had moved in temporarily to help with the grandkids, Ruby and Trent, while Jody pursued her influencer career and Carl climbed the corporate ladder at a logistics firm. "Marley, are those ribs ready yet? The guests are starving," Jody's voice shrilled from the hallway. Jody entered the kitchen like a whirlwind of beige linen and expensive perfume. She didn't look at Marley. She looked at the platter. "And please, Marley, use the white ceramic plates, not those old mismatched ones you brought from your apartment. They ruin the aesthetic of the tablescape." Marley felt a familiar prickle of heat in her chest. "These mismatched plates were a wedding gift from my late husband, Frank Jody. They've held more Sunday dinners than you've had birthdays." Jody rolled her eyes, checking her reflection in the polished chrome of the toaster. "Whatever. Just keep it classy, okay? My sisters are here, and Carl's boss might stop by. We want to look like a successful family, not a community center." Successful. The word felt like ash in Marley's mouth. She had worked 3 jobs to put Carl through Morehouse College. She had worn shoes with holes in the soles so he could have the best cleats for varsity football. Now she was a prop in his success. The backyard was a sea of polished faces. Carl was at the grill, though Marley had done all the prep work. He wore a grill master apron, laughing loudly at a joke made by his brother-in-law. Marley stepped onto the deck, the heavy platter in her hands. She felt invisible. People moved around her as if she were a piece of furniture, a sturdy, dark mahogany sideboard that had always been there and therefore required no acknowledgement. She saw Ruby, her 16-year-old granddaughter, sitting off to the side, staring at her phone. Ruby looked up, and for a brief second, their eyes met. There was a flicker of something in the girl's gaze. Pity? Guilt? Before Marley could process it, Jody called Ruby away to pose for a family Sunday photo. "Everyone look happy. Tag it #blessed, #family first, #luxury living," Jody commanded. Marley wasn't in the photo. She was asked to hold the reflector so the lighting on Jody's cheekbones would be snatched. After the food was served, the heat became stifling. Marley decided to retreat inside to grab a glass of iced tea. As she approached the back gate, near the heavy oak tree she had planted herself, she heard the voices. It was the low, conspiratorial tone that usually preceded gossip. She stopped behind the tall wooden fence. "I'm telling you, Carl, it's getting to be too much." Jody's voice was sharp. "She's always there. I can't even have a glass of wine in my own kitchen without her looking at me with those nurse eyes, judging me. And the smell of that heavy soul food, it lingers in the curtains. It's not the vibe we're going for." Marley's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "She helped us get the house, Jodes," Carl's voice followed. It was weak, a coward's defense. "We needed that 40 grand. And we've paid her back in room and board," Jody snapped. "The kids are grown now. Ruby doesn't need a nanny. She's just an extra mouth to feed and a constant reminder of the struggle years. Honestly, why is she even still alive and living here? To watch us and spend her Social Security on knitting yarn? She's a ghost in our house, Carl. A ghost that eats our food and takes up the guest suite." Then came the sound that broke Marley's soul. Carl laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but a dismissive, subservient chuckle. I know. I'll talk to her. Maybe we can look into those active senior communities in the county. You know, the ones that are basically high-end warehouses for the elderly. We'll get our space back soon, I promise." The world didn't end. The sun didn't fall from the sky. The hickory smoke still drifted through the air. But inside Marley, a tectonic shift had occurred. She didn't drop the glass she was holding. She didn't burst through the gate and scream. That would be dramatic. That would be exactly what they expected, the angry black woman trope they could use to justify kicking her out. Instead, Marley leaned her head against the cool wood of the fence. She thought about the 32 years of cleaning bedpans, the double shifts at Johns Hopkins, the way she had nursed Frank through his final days until her own back felt like it was made of broken glass. Why is she even still alive? To reclaim what is mine, Marley whispered to the empty air. She didn't go back into the house. She walked to her old sedan, parked down the street because Jody didn't want a 10-year-old Toyota in the driveway during the BBQ. She sat in the driver's seat and turned on the AC. She needed to think. She needed a plan. That evening, after the guests had gone and the house was filled with the clatter of the dishwasher, Marley retreated to her guest suite, a room that held her entire life in boxes she had never fully unpacked. She sat at her small escritoire and pulled out her financial folder. She was meticulous with paperwork. You had to be, as a nurse. She was looking for her original gift letter for the $40,000. But as she shuffled through the deed documents she had kept copies of, something caught her eye. A recent notification from the county land records office that she had tucked away, thinking it was just a tax assessment. She read it again. Then she read it a third time. Her name was still on the title of the house. Carl had never removed her. But there was a new lien, a second mortgage, a home equity line of credit, HELOC, for $150,000. Marley's breath hitched. She hadn't signed for a HELOC. She hadn't been to a bank in months. She pulled out the digital copy of the signature page she had requested from the county clerk weeks ago, but hadn't looked at closely. There it was. Marley R. Higgins. The handwriting was close, very close, but the M had a slight loop at the bottom, a flourish Carl used to make when he was practicing his professional signature in college. Carl had forged her signature to pull $150,000 out of the house she had bought for him. The house where he was currently laughing with his wife about her being a ghost. Marley didn't cry. She felt a strange, icy calm. It was the same calm she felt in the ER when a patient was coding. You don't panic. You follow the protocol. Protocol Step 1. Secure the perimeter. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Lena, it's Marley. I know it's Sunday night, but I need you to put on your lawyer hat. No one is dead. But someone is about to be very, very sorry. The next morning, Marley was in the kitchen at 6 a.m., just like always. She had coffee brewed. She had oatmeal on the stove. Carl walked in, looking hungover and stressed. He didn't look her in the eye. Morning, Ma. Morning, Carl, Marley said, her voice as smooth as silk. Big day at the office? Yeah, always, he muttered, grabbing his travel mug. Listen, Jodes and I were thinking, maybe we should take a look at your health insurance. Make sure everything is optimized. You know, for the future. The future? Marley smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's so thoughtful of you, Carl, to be so concerned with my optimization. Yeah, well, family first, right? He kissed her cheek, a dry, perfunctory peck, and hurried out the door. Marley watched his car pull out of the driveway. She looked at the house, the crown molding she had picked out, the hardwood floors she had insisted on. Family first, she repeated. She went to the hallway closet and pulled out a small, unassuming suitcase. She didn't pack clothes. She went to the aesthetic display shelves in the living room. She took down the small, hand-carved wooden elephant Frank had bought her in Senegal. She took the photo of her mother from the mantel. She took the silver candlesticks that had belonged to her great-grandmother. She replaced them with cheap, identical-looking versions she had bought at a discount store months ago, just in case. As she walked back to her room, she saw Ruby standing in the shadows of the upstairs landing. The girl was wearing an oversized hoodie, her face pale. Grandma? Ruby whispered. Marley stopped. Yes, baby? I heard them, yesterday, at the BBQ. Ruby's voice trembled. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Marley walked up the stairs and took Ruby's face in her hands. She could smell the faint scent of the expensive shampoo Jody insisted Ruby use. Don't be sorry, Ruby. Be observant, Marley said firmly. The world will try to tell you who you are. Your parents will try to tell you who I am. But you watch. You watch what happens when a ghost decides to stop haunting and starts living. Ruby blinked, a single tear tracking through her foundation. Are you leaving? Not yet, Marley whispered. I still have a few more things to collect. Marley went back to her room and closed the door. She sat on her bed and opened her journal. On the first page, she wrote 3 names: Carl, Jody, the house. Then she drew a single thick black line through all of them. The morning after the BBQ, the sun rose over Maryland with a deceptive warmth. Inside the house, life appeared to resume its frantic, shallow rhythm. Jody was busy recording a day in the life reel in the marble-clad master bathroom, chirping about organic serums to a ring light. Carl was hunched over his laptop in the breakfast nook, his fingers tapping nervously against the mahogany wood, the rhythm of a man who knew he was drowning, but hoped the water would stay at chin level. Marley stood at the stove, stirring a pot of stone-ground grits. She moved with a deliberate slowness. To Jody, she looked like a tired old woman lingering in the kitchen. To Carl, she was a piece of the background. But Marley was occupied with a different kind of calculation. Every time she moved around the house, she was taking inventory, not of their things, but of hers. The expensive KitchenAid mixer she'd bought for herself 5 years ago? It was going. The hand-woven rugs from her trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains? Going. Every cent, every item, every ounce of effort she had poured into this family investment was being mentally appraised for extraction. At 10 a.m., under the guise of a senior stretching class, Marley drove to a small, nondescript office building in downtown Baltimore. Lena Moore's office didn't have a view of the harbor, but it was filled with the smell of old paper and the kind of quiet power that only 40 years of probate law can produce. Lena, a woman with silver hair cropped short and eyes that could see through a brick wall, didn't offer a hug. She offered a seat and a legal pad. "I looked at the documents you sent, Marley," Lena said, her voice a low gravel. "The HELOC is the smoking gun. Carl didn't just forge your name. He used a notary who was either incompetent or in his pocket. This is felony territory." Marley took a sip of the peppermint tea Lena had provided. "I don't want him in an orange jumpsuit, Lena. Not yet. I want him to feel what it's like to lose the ground beneath his feet, just like he's been letting Jody erode mine for years. Then we play the long game." Lena leaned back. "If we file for a partition of the property, we can force a sale. But since you have the gift letter and proof of the forged signature, we can argue that your equity isn't just the down payment. It's the majority of the home's current value. We can effectively strip him of the profit he thinks he's sitting on." Marley nodded. "Do it, but don't serve the papers yet. I want the house to be empty of my spirit before the walls come down." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in subtlety. Marley began cleaning. "Jody, dear," Marley said one Tuesday afternoon, holding up a stack of fine linen napkins. "These are getting a bit yellowed. I think I'll take them to a specialist cleaner across town. Don't want them ruining your aesthetic for the dinner party next week." "Whatever, Marley. Just make sure the laundry doesn't pile up," Jody replied, not looking up from her iPad. The napkins never went to a cleaner. They went to a climate-controlled storage unit Marley had rented in her own name, a 30-minute drive away. Next went the silver, then the vintage books, then the high-end gardening tools. One evening, Carl noticed a gap on the bookshelf. "Hey, Ma, where's that set of encyclopedias? The old ones with the leather bindings?" Marley didn't blink. "Oh, I thought I heard Jody say they were cluttering the room, Carl. I moved them to the attic for safekeeping." Carl shrugged. He didn't check the attic. If he had, he would have found it empty. He was too consumed by the final notice emails appearing in his inbox, emails Marley saw over his shoulder every time she brought him a supportive cup of tea. The biggest obstacle wasn't Carl or Jody, it was Ruby. The 16-year-old was becoming a shadow in her own home. She had stopped taking photos for her mother's Instagram. She had stopped asking Carl for help with her homework. One night, Marley found Ruby in the Gara, sitting on a pile of old moving blankets, crying silently. "Tell me, baby," Marley said, sitting beside her. "Bo dang treat so, don't come ba?" Ruby asked, her English slipping into the rhythm of her father's childhood when she was upset. "I saw him on the phone. He was crying. He was talking about margins and interest rates and how he just needed more time before you found out." Marley felt a pang of guilt, but she pushed it down. This was the fire that would forge Ruby's future. "Your father made choices, Ruby. He chose to build a house on sand because it looked better in pictures. But sand shifts. Don't leave me with them," Ruby whispered. "When you go, please. Mom only sees me as a brand. Dad doesn't even see me at all anymore." Marley reached into her pocket and pulled out a spare key to the storage unit. "This isn't just for furniture, Ruby. It's for a new life. You keep this hidden. If things get too loud here, you go to Lena's office. She knows who you are." As Marley comforted Ruby, she realized that Ruby hadn't just heard Carl on the phone. Ruby had been recording him. She handed Marley her phone. A series of voice memos where Carl admitted to Jody that he had handled the Marley situation and that the bank wouldn't ask questions as long as the old lady stayed quiet in the guest room. This was the final nail. It wasn't just financial theft. It was a conspiracy. By the end of the second week, Marley's guest suite looked the same to the casual observer, but to Marley, it was a hollow shell. The boxes under the bed were now filled with old newspapers instead of her life's work. The jewelry box on the dresser held costume pearls, while her real gold, the gold Frank had bought her for every anniversary, was in a safe deposit box at a bank Carl didn't even know she used. She had spent 30 years being the invisible architect of Carl's life. She had built his confidence, his career, and his home. Now she was simply deconstructing the scaffolding. On the final Friday of the month, Marley prepared a lavish dinner: pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans with bacon. The house smelled like the family-first dream Jody loved to sell. "This is great, Ma," Carl said, stuffing his face. He looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot. "Things are going to get better soon. I've got a big deal closing." "I'm sure you do, Carl," Marley said, her voice a calm, steady hum. "I've always believed in your ability to handle things." Jody sipped her wine, oblivious. "We should do a reel of this dinner. 3 generations at one table. It'll get huge engagement." "I'm afraid I won't be available for the engagement tonight, Jody," Marley said, standing up. "I have a late-night bridge game with Lena and the girls. I might stay over at her place since it's getting foggy." "Fine, whatever," Jody waved a hand. "Just don't wake us up when you come back." Marley looked at them, really looked at them, one last time. She didn't feel anger. She felt the cold, clean relief of a nurse who had finished a long shift and was finally going home. She walked out the front door with nothing but her purse and a small tote bag. She didn't look back at the house she had paid for. She didn't look back at the son who had forged her name. As she pulled out of the driveway, her phone buzzed. A text from Lena. "The process servers are scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Sleep well, Marley. The storm begins at dawn." Marley turned on the radio. A smooth jazz track filled the car. She drove toward the Baltimore skyline, her hands steady on the wheel, finally the captain of her own soul. Marley woke up on the morning of her 63rd birthday in the guest bedroom of Lena's Baltimore townhouse. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't wake up to the sound of Jody's ring light clicking on, or Carl's heavy, anxious footsteps pacing the floorboards above her. She woke up to the soft hum of city traffic and the smell of roasting chicory coffee. She lay in bed for a moment, looking at her hands. These hands had bathed her dying husband. They had inserted thousands of IV lines into the fragile veins of frightened patients. They had braided Ruby's hair and folded Carl's college laundry. They were strong, capable hands. And today they were not going to hold a spatula or a dustpan. Today they were going to hold Carl accountable. Lena had sent a text at 7 a.m. "Process servers are holding off until 3 p.m. as requested. Give them hell, Marley." Marley dressed with the meticulous care of a soldier preparing for a final deployment. She didn't wear the comfortable, oversized cardigans she usually wore around Carl's house. She chose a tailored, emerald green suit she hadn't worn since her retirement dinner, a color of life, money, and undeniable presence. She pinned a small, vintage gold brooch to her lapel, a piece her own mother had worn to church every Sunday. When she arrived back at the suburban house at 1 p.m., she parked her old Toyota on the street, leaving the driveway clear. She took a deep breath, the crisp air filling her lungs, and walked up the pristine concrete path. The moment Marley stepped through the front door, the artificiality of the atmosphere hit her like a physical force. "Surprise! Happy birthday, Marley!" Jody's voice was pitched an octave higher than usual, dripping with the kind of sweetness that only masks poison. The living room had been transformed into a Pinterest-perfect brunch setting. A balloon arch in neutral tones, white, beige, and sage green, framed the dining table. A catered spread of avocado toast, artisanal cheeses, and mimosas sat on the counter. It was a birthday party designed entirely for the camera, not for the woman being celebrated. Carl rushed forward, a tight, nervous smile plastered across his face. He kissed her cheek, but his eyes were darting everywhere except her face. He was sweating slightly, a sheen of moisture on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Happy birthday, Ma. Wow, you look really dressed up." "A woman should look her best when she turns a new leaf, Carl," Marley said, her voice smooth and unbothered. She glided past him, her presence commanding the room in a way it hadn't in years. She noticed Ruby standing near the staircase, wearing a plain black t-shirt, her arms crossed. When their eyes met, Ruby gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Marley nodded back. The alliance was silent, but unbreakable. For the next hour, Marley played her part. She let Jody position her for photos. She smiled while Carl gave a hollow toast about family legacy and how my parents always taught me the value of hard work, a phrase that made Marley want to laugh out loud, considering he was currently drowning in secret debt. She ate the dry catered food, sipping a glass of sparkling water, waiting for the real reason they had thrown this expensive charade. She knew Carl's financial walls were closing in. This party was an investment. The moment arrived right after the cake was cut. Jody cleared the plates with unusual speed, while Carl pulled out a sleek, leather-bound folder from his briefcase. He placed it on the table in front of Marley, right next to her slice of red velvet cake. "So, Ma," Carl began, rubbing the back of his neck. His voice took on the patronizing tone of a bank teller explaining a basic checking account to a toddler. "We've been thinking a lot about the future. You're 63 now. You've worked so hard your whole life, and Jodes and I just want you to relax." "Relax," Marley repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Exactly," Jody chimed in, leaning over the table, her phone strategically placed face down, but definitely recording audio. "You shouldn't have to worry about the stress of managing your finances, paying bills, or making complex medical choices if, God forbid, something happens. We want to take that burden off your shoulders." Carl opened the folder. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents. "This is a durable power of attorney and a financial management trust agreement. It basically just lets me handle the tedious stuff. Your pension, your savings accounts, your investments. It puts us all in one streamlined family portfolio. It's for your own protection, Ma." Marley looked down at the documents. The audacity of it was almost breathtaking. Having secretly drained the house's equity through a forged HELOC, Carl was now trying to legally hijack her life savings, the money she had earned through 32 years of backbreaking nursing shifts, to cover his tracks before the bank foreclosed. "For my protection," Marley said softly. She didn't touch the pen he had placed beside the folder. "Yes, so you can just enjoy your retirement, yai." Jody smiled brightly. "Just sign at the bottom of the first 3 pages, and we'll get it notarized tomorrow." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the designer clock on the wall. Marley slowly reached out, but not for the pen. She picked up the leather folder, closed it, and slid it back across the table until it hit Carl's chest. "I've been protecting myself since before you were a thought in my womb, Carl," Marley said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It possessed the gravitational pull of a black hole, inescapable and absolute. Carl blinked, his fake smile faltering. "Ma, come on, don't be stubborn. It's just standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" Marley interrupted, standing up. She towered over him, even in her sensible heels. "Is forging your mother's signature on a $150,000 home equity line of credit standard procedure, Carl?" The color instantly drained from Carl's face. He looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He stumbled backward, knocking his chair against the wall. "What, I don't know what you're talking about." Jody gasped, her influencer mask slipping off to reveal pure, unfiltered panic. "Carl, what is she talking about?" "I'm talking about the second mortgage you secretly took out on this house, Carl." Marley's voice rang out, clear and sharp. She wasn't just speaking to him anymore. She was speaking to the universe, reclaiming her narrative. "I'm talking about the notary you paid off to witness a forged signature. You thought because my hands are old, my mind must be slow. You thought because I stayed quiet I was blind." "Ma, please keep your voice down," Carl hissed, looking toward the windows as if the neighbors were already listening. "I was going to fix it. The crypto market crashed, but I have a deal coming through. I just needed some time. You needed a bank," Marley cut him off. "But you didn't go to a bank because a bank requires collateral you don't have. So you looked at the woman who gave you life, who scrubbed hospital floors to buy your first car, who handed you $40,000 to buy this very house. And you saw an ATM. You're acting crazy, Marley, Jody shrieked, finally finding her voice. You're ruining the party. If you don't like the arrangement, you can just leave. Marley turned her gaze to Jody. It was a look that could freeze boiling water. Oh, I am leaving, Jody. But before I do, let me remind you of something. The down payment for the marble floors you stand on? Mine. The equity your husband just stole? Mine. The legacy you try to project on your little screen? Built on my back. Marley reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her set of house keys. The heavy metal jingled loudly in the quiet room. She dropped them onto the glass dining table. The clack echoed like a gunshot. I am not a ghost, Marley said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am the foundation you built this plastic life on, and I am pulling myself out from under you. Right at that moment, as if summoned by Marley's final words, the doorbell rang. It was exactly 3 p.m. Lena's timing was, as always, flawless. Carl flinched. He stared at the door, paralyzed. Are you expecting someone? He whispered to Jody. Jody shook her head, terrified. Marley didn't move to open it. She just stood there, her emerald suit pristine, her posture perfect. You should get that, Carl. It's the consequence of your standard procedures. Trembling, Carl walked to the front door and pulled it open. A tall man in a plain windbreaker stood on the porch, holding a thick manila envelope. Carl H. Higgins? The man asked. Yes? You've been served. The man thrust the envelope into Carl's chest and walked briskly away. Carl opened the envelope with shaking hands. The top document bore the seal of the Maryland State Court. It was a partition of property lawsuit demanding the immediate forced sale of the house. Beneath it was a formal notice of intent to report fraudulent financial activity regarding the HELOC. No, Carl stammered, his legs giving out. He sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying his face in his hands. Jody snatched the papers from him, reading frantically. A forced sale? Fraud? Marley, you can't do this. They'll take the house. Where will we go? What about Ruby? At the mention of her name, Ruby stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. She walked past her mother, who was hyperventilating over the legal documents, and past her father, who was weeping on the stairs. She didn't look at either of them. She walked straight to Marley. She was carrying a heavy backpack. I packed my things, Grandma, Ruby said, her voice steady. Carl looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Ruby, what are you doing? Go back to your room. She's not going to her room, Carl, Marley said, putting a protective arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. She's coming with me, because unlike you, she actually values the truth more than the aesthetic. Marley didn't wait for Carl's protests or Jody's screams. She turned her back on the balloon arch, the avocado toast, and the ruins of her son's fraudulent empire. She opened the front door and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. Pulled up to the curb, right behind Marley's old Toyota, was a sleek black Lincoln Town car. Sitting in the driver's seat was Lena, wearing dark sunglasses. In the back seat were Martha and Beatrice, 2 women from Marley's church, both widows, both sharp as tacks. They were the Golden Girls. Martha rolled down the window, a sly smile on her face. You ready to go, birthday girl? More ready than I've ever been, Marley smiled, the weight of 30 years lifting from her shoulders. She guided Ruby toward her Toyota, tossing the keys to the teenager. You drive my car, baby. Follow the Lincoln. I'm riding with my girls. As Marley opened the door to the town car, she looked back at the house one last time. Carl was standing in the doorway, the legal papers clutched in his hand, his mouth open in silent despair. He looked small. He looked exactly like the frightened little boy she used to protect. But Marley was done protecting people who wouldn't protect her. She slid into the leather seat of the Lincoln, closing the door firmly. Lena put the car in drive, and they pulled away from the curb, leaving the shattered illusion of the perfect family in their rearview mirror. Marley leaned back, closed her eyes, and listened to the low hum of the engine. She was 63 years old, and for the very first time, her life belonged entirely to her. The silence that fell over the suburban Maryland house after the Lincoln Town car disappeared was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a Sunday evening. It was the deafening, ringing silence that follows a detonation. Carl stood in the open doorway, the legal papers trembling in his hands. The breeze blew a stray sage-green balloon from the happy birthday arch across the hardwood floor. It popped against a chair leg, making him flinch. "Carl!" Jody's voice was a tight, high-pitched wire about to snap. She had retreated to the kitchen, clutching her phone as if it were a life raft. "Tell me this is a bluff. Tell me that crazy old woman is just trying to scare us." Carl slowly closed the front door. The lock clicked, but it offered no security. "It's not a bluff, Jodes. It's a partition lawsuit, and a notice of intent to report, and fraud." Jody's face contorted. The curated influencer mask shattered entirely, revealing the terrified, calculating woman underneath. "Fraud? You told me the bank approved the second mortgage. You told me her name was just a formality on the title." "I needed the money, Jody," Carl finally yelled, his own panic boiling over. "You wanted the marble countertops. You wanted the luxury SUV lease. And when the crypto market tanked, the HELOC was the only way to cover the margins without losing everything." I just copied her signature. "She never reads anything anyway. How was I supposed to know she was hoarding the original gift letter and talking to a pit bull like Lena Moore?" Jody stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of disgust and self-preservation. In that moment, Carl realized the most terrifying truth of all. His wife had never loved his character. She had only loved his utility. And his utility had just dropped to 0. "They're going to force a sale," Jody whispered, looking around the living room as if the walls were already decaying. "We have 0 equity. The HELOC ate it all. If they sell this house, the bank takes their cut, your mother takes the rest, and we are left with nothing. Worse than nothing. Debt." Carl sank onto the pristine sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I can fix it. I just need to get her to drop the suit. I have her power of attorney documents." "Wait." He looked at the table. Marley hadn't signed them. His final safety net, hijacking her life savings to pay off his fraudulent loan, was gone. Upstairs, the door to Ruby's empty bedroom stood wide open. The house was a tomb, and Carl had dug it himself. 40 miles away, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Marley's new apartment was on the 4th floor of a historic brick building in downtown Baltimore. It didn't have marble floors or a professional-grade outdoor kitchen. It had worn oak floorboards, wide windows that let in the golden afternoon light, and a faint smell of beeswax and old books. It was perfect. Ruby was asleep on the plush velvet sofa in the living room. She had been asleep for 14 hours. Marley knew from her decades as a nurse that trauma exhausted the body just as much as manual labor. The girl was finally in a place where she didn't have to monitor the emotional temperature of the room to survive. She was safe. Marley stood at the small kitchen counter, her hands dusted with flour. She was making buttermilk biscuits, not from a can, and not for an Instagram aesthetic. She was making them because her grandmother had taught her how, cutting the cold butter into the flour with a fork until it looked like coarse sand. When the smell of baking butter and dough filled the apartment, Ruby stirred. She sat up slowly, pulling the knitted afghan tightly around her shoulders. "Morning, sleepyhead," Marley said, pouring a cup of Earl Grey tea and setting it on the small bistro table by the window. "Or should I say good afternoon?" Ruby rubbed her eyes, looking around the sunlit room. There were no ring lights, no tripods, just books, a few healthy pothos plants, and the rhythmic ticking of an analog clock. "It's so quiet here, Grandma." "Peace usually is, baby," Marley replied, pulling a tray of golden brown biscuits from the oven. She split one open, the steam rising, and spread a dollop of blackberry preserves on it before handing it to Ruby. Ruby took a bite, closing her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "Dad called me 17 times. Mom texted me saying I was ruining the family brand by running away." Marley sat across from her, her expression steady and fierce. "You didn't run away, Ruby. You evacuated. There is a difference. A burning building doesn't get to demand why you won't stay and burn with it." Ruby looked down at her tea. "What happens now? To them? To the house?" "The law happens," Marley said simply. "Your father made choices based on greed and arrogance. Now he has to sit at the table he set. But you and I, we are going to build a new table. You'll enroll in the magnet school down the street. You'll figure out who you are when nobody is recording you." Ruby looked up, her dark eyes reflecting the sunlight. For the first time in years, she looked like a teenager, not an accessory. "Thank you, Grandma." 2 days later, Carl, driven by sheer desperation, walked into the polished downtown offices of Lena Moore. He had dressed in his best charcoal suit, attempting to project the authority of a successful executive. But the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands betrayed him. He demanded to see Lena. To his surprise, the receptionist ushered him right in. Lena was waiting at her massive oak desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She didn't offer him a seat. "Carl," Lena said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "to what do I owe the displeasure?" Carl gripped the back of a leather chair, trying to steady himself. "This has gone far enough, Lena. My mother is clearly having some sort of episode. She's confused. I want the partition lawsuit dropped immediately, and I want to discuss a conservatorship. She's not in her right mind." Lena slowly took off her glasses. She let out a laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping across a tombstone. "A conservatorship? Carl, the only person in this room who needs a psychiatric evaluation is the man who thinks he can forge a federal lending document and walk away with a slap on the wrist." Carl flinched. I can explain the HELOC. It was a misunderstanding. I have the funds to— "Stop!" Lena snapped, pointing a pen at him like a weapon. "Do not insult my intelligence, and do not dig your grave any deeper in my office. I have the original deed. I have the gift letter stipulating the $40,000 down payment. And most importantly, I have the forensic handwriting analysis from the notary records on the second mortgage. You didn't just borrow against her equity, Carl. You committed felony wire fraud and identity theft." The color drained from Carl's face. His knees buckled slightly, and he fell heavily into the chair he hadn't been offered. "Here is the reality of your situation," Lena continued, opening a file on her desk. "We are forcing the sale of the property. Because you illegally extracted $150,000 of equity without Marley's consent, the court will place a constructive trust on the sale proceeds. Every single dime of profit from that house goes to Marley to repay the stolen equity. You and Jody will walk away with absolutely nothing. In fact, you will likely owe the bank the remainder of the fraudulent loan." "Lena, please," Carl's voice cracked. The executive facade shattered completely. He was begging. "If we lose the house, Jodes will leave me. I'll be bankrupt. Tell Ma I'm sorry. Tell her I'll do whatever she wants. Just please don't take the house. It's all I have." Lena leaned forward, her eyes cold and hard. "That is exactly why she is taking it, Carl. Because you valued the wood and the marble more than the woman who bled to pay for it. The lawsuit proceeds. If you contest it, I will hand the forgery evidence over to the district attorney, and you will do this negotiation from a federal penitentiary. Choose wisely." Carl walked out of Lena's office a broken man. He had thought his mother was a weak, invisible old woman. He had severely underestimated the quiet, lethal precision of a matriarch scorned. While Carl was facing the guillotine in Lena's office, Marley was sitting in the plush, quiet lobby of the First National Wealth Management Group. She wasn't there to check on her checking account. She was there to execute the final phase of her plan, the move that would ensure her total liberation. A distinguished-looking wealth manager, Mr. Sterling, escorted her into his office. "Mrs. Higgins, it's a pleasure. I have reviewed the portfolio you transferred to us from your previous bank. $320,000 in liquid savings and retirement accounts. A very impressive nest egg. How can we help you grow it today?" Marley took a sip of the sparkling water he offered. "I don't want to grow it, Mr. Sterling. I want to give it away." The wealth manager blinked, surprised. "Give it away? Ma'am, this is your retirement. While philanthropy is noble, you must ensure your own comfort." "I am comfortable," Marley said with a serene smile. "My pension from the hospital covers my rent and my groceries. Social Security covers my luxuries. But this money was accumulated through blood, sweat, and 32 years of double shifts. For a long time, I kept it because I thought I needed to leave a safety net for my son." She thought of Carl. She thought of the power of attorney documents he had slid across the table, trying to steal this very money to cover his debts. "My son does not need a safety net," Marley continued, her voice firm. "He needs to hit the ground. That is the only way he will learn to stand up on his own." Marley reached into her purse and pulled out a faded, black-and-white photograph. It showed a stern but beautiful black woman in a crisp white 1950s nursing uniform. "This is my mother, Evelyn," Marley said softly. "She scrubbed floors in a segregated hospital just so I could go to nursing school. She never had the chance to be a registered nurse. She was just the help. Marley placed the photograph on Mr. Sterling's mahogany desk. "I want to establish an irrevocable trust," Marley instructed. "The Evelyn Higgins Memorial Scholarship. I want every single cent of that $320,000 transferred into it. It is to be managed by the United Negro College Fund, designated specifically for young, low-income black women from Baltimore entering the nursing program at Howard University or Coppin State." Mr. Sterling looked at the photograph, then up at Marley. The shock in his eyes melted into profound respect. "Mrs. Higgins, that is a legacy that will change generations of lives." "Yes, it will," Marley nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "I spent my life trying to pour water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. My son took my sacrifices for granted. These girls won't. I want to leave my wealth to the future, not to my past." "We will draw up the paperwork immediately," Mr. Sterling said, picking up his phone. As Marley signed the irrevocable trust documents, effectively draining her net worth to zero, but filling her soul to the brim, she felt lighter than air. Carl had thought she was holding on to her money. He didn't realize that by letting it go, she was becoming untouchable. She was no longer a victim of his greed. She was a benefactor to the world. 3 weeks later, Carl sat in a cheap, rented studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. The suburban house was gone, sold to a cash buyer in a matter of days. Jody had packed her bags the moment the for sale sign hit the lawn, taking whatever designer items she could carry and moving back in with her sister, blaming Carl for destroying her brand. Carl was entirely alone. He walked over to the small pile of mail on his laminate kitchen counter. Among the final collection notices and credit card bills, there was a heavy cream-colored envelope. He opened it. It wasn't a legal threat. It was a glossy brochure. Across the top, in elegant gold lettering, it read, "The Evelyn Higgins Memorial Scholarship for Nursing Excellence." Below it was a picture of Marley, looking radiant, standing next to 3 young, smiling black women in nursing scrubs. The text detailed a massive foundational endowment created by Marley Higgins, dedicated to empowering the next generation of healthcare workers. A small handwritten note on Marley's stationery fell out of the brochure. Carl picked it up with trembling fingers. "Carl, you spent years waiting for me to die so you could inherit my life. I decided to give my life to those who actually want to live it. You are free now. Free from the ghost in the guest room. Free from my money. Free to finally become a man. Do not look for me. Marley." Carl read the note. He looked at the faces of the young women in the brochure, women whose futures were secured by the money he had tried to steal. He dropped the paper, sinking to the floor of his empty apartment. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a man realizing that he had traded a diamond for a handful of dirt, and the wind had just blown the dirt away. 3 years passed. In the grand tapestry of a life, 3 years is a brief thread. But for Marley Higgins, it was an entire renaissance. At 66, Marley did not look like a woman who had lost her home or her life savings. She looked like a woman who had finally found herself. The deep exhaustion that used to shadow her eyes during her time in Carl's suburban mansion was gone. Her skin glowed with the kind of vitality that only comes from a stress-free existence and the joy of waking up every day on one's own terms. Her Baltimore apartment had blossomed into a sanctuary. The walls were lined with books she actually had time to read, and the windowsills overflowed with thriving jade plants and orchids. She volunteered 3 days a week at a local community clinic, using her decades of nursing experience to help young mothers. She played bridge on Thursdays with Lena and the Golden Girls, their laughter echoing down the hallway of her building. And then there was Ruby. Ruby was now 19, a sophomore at Howard University, studying public health. She lived in a dorm but spent most of her weekends on Marley's velvet sofa. The timid, phone-obsessed teenager from the suburban BBQ had vanished. In her place was a confident, articulate young black woman who looked the world squarely in the eye. The scholarship fund Marley had created in her own mother's name had already put 6 girls through their first year of nursing school. Marley occasionally received letters from them, letters filled with profound gratitude. She kept them in a beautiful cedar box on her coffee table. They were her true dividends. Carl had become a ghost, a cautionary tale. Ruby occasionally shared brief updates. Jody had officially filed for divorce, taking whatever social capital she had left to marry a fitness trainer in Miami. Carl had lost his executive position when the scandal of the HELOC fraud reached his firm's HR department. He had avoided jail only because Marley had instructed Lena not to press criminal charges once the house was sold and the equity was recovered. He was currently working as a mid-level logistics coordinator, living in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable zip code. Marley felt no joy in his downfall, but she felt no guilt either. Gravity always collects its debts. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon in late October. The air in Patterson Park was sharp with the scent of fallen oak leaves and wood smoke. Marley was sitting on her favorite wrought iron bench near the pagoda, wrapped in a thick wool coat, watching a group of children chase a stray soccer ball. She was at peace. Then a shadow fell over the pavement in front of her. Marley looked up. Standing there, holding a paper cup of black coffee, was Carl. He looked 10 years older than his actual age. The tailored suits and the arrogant posture of the successful executive were gone. He wore a faded flannel jacket and denim jeans. His hair was thinning, and his shoulders were slumped, carrying the invisible weight of a man who had been thoroughly dismantled by his own hubris. "Hi, Ma," Carl said. His voice was rough, hesitant. He didn't step closer, instinctively respecting the invisible boundary Marley had drawn around herself 3 years ago. Marley didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She looked at him with the calm, assessing eyes of an ER nurse triaging a patient. "Carl," she replied, her voice neutral. "You're a long way from your office." "I took the afternoon off," he said, gesturing vaguely to the empty space on the bench next to her. Can I sit?" Marley took a slow breath. 3 years ago, she would have slid over immediately, eager to accommodate him. Today, she let the silence stretch for a long moment before giving a single, short nod. Carl sat down carefully, keeping a foot of distance between them. He stared at his coffee cup, turning it slowly in his hands. "Ruby told me you come here sometimes," he admitted softly. "I promised her I wouldn't ambush you. I needed to see you." "You've seen me," Marley said, looking back out at the park. "Say what you came to say, Carl." Carl let out a shuddering breath. The walls he had built his entire life, the pride, the entitlement, the desperate need to keep up appearances, crumbled right there on the park bench. "I lost it all, Ma," he whispered, a tear slipping down his weathered cheek. "The house, the job, Jody. Ruby barely speaks to me unless it's about logistics. I sit in my apartment at night, and it's so quiet it makes my ears ring." Marley didn't interrupt. She let him speak into the void he had created. "I thought I was a king," Carl continued, his voice breaking. "I thought because I made a 6-figure salary, I was better than the neighborhood we came from, better than the struggles you went through. I looked at you, and I didn't see my mother. I just saw an old woman who didn't fit into the aesthetic of the life I was faking." He turned to look at her, his eyes red and brimming with desperate remorse. "When I opened that brochure for the scholarship, when I saw what you did with the money, it broke me, Ma. It broke me because I realized that you were building a legacy, and I was just building a trap. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Not for the money, not for the house. I'm sorry I threw away the only person in this world who ever loved me without conditions." He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, begging for contact, begging for absolution. "Please, Ma. I don't want anything from you. I just want my mother back. Can we start over? Can I come over for Sunday dinners again?" Marley looked at her son's trembling hand. The maternal instinct, the ancient bone-deep urge to comfort her child, to pull his head to her chest and tell him everything would be all right, surged within her. It was a powerful, intoxicating pull. But Marley was no longer the woman who sacrificed herself on the altar of her son's comfort. She looked Carl in the eyes. Her gaze was not angry, but it was absolute. "I forgive you, Carl," Marley said softly. Carl exhaled a sob of relief, his shoulders dropping. "Thank God. Ma, thank you." "But you cannot come to dinner," Marley interrupted, her voice stopping him dead. Carl froze. "What? But you just said you forgive me." "I did," Marley explained, her tone steady and profound. "I forgive you because carrying hatred for you is like drinking poison and expecting you to die. I forgive you so I can sleep at night. But forgiveness is not the same thing as access, Carl." Carl stared at her, heartbroken and confused. "You broke something that cannot be glued back together with an apology," Marley said, pulling her coat tighter. "You showed me who you are when you thought you had all the power. You laughed while your wife wondered why I was still alive. You forged my name. You tried to legally strip me of my dignity so you could keep a marble kitchen. She stood up from the bench. She looked down at the man she had raised. I love you, Carl. I always will. You are my son, but I do not trust you, and I will not allow anyone into my sanctuary who I cannot trust. Ma, please, Carl wept, looking up at her. People change. I've changed. I believe you, Marley nodded gently. And I hope you use that change to build an honest life for yourself. Be a better father to Ruby. Be a better man. But my table is full, Carl, and the seat you gave up is no longer available. Marley turned and walked down the paved path. She didn't look back. She knew Carl was sitting there on the bench, crying alone. It was a tragedy, yes, but it was his tragedy to bear, not hers to fix. For the first time in her life, she walked away from her son's pain, and the sky did not fall. Sunday evening arrived with a cool, gentle rain. Inside Marley's apartment, the air was warm, thick with the intoxicating, smoky aroma of St. Louis-style ribs baking low and slow in the oven. Aretha Franklin's Daydreaming played softly from a vintage record player in the corner. Ruby was standing at the kitchen counter, wearing an apron over her college sweatshirt, expertly whisking a bowl of Marley's famous dry rub. More brown sugar, Grandma? Ruby asked, peering into the bowl. Just a pinch, baby, Marley smiled, pouring 2 glasses of sweet tea. You want the heat to catch them by surprise, not the sweet. Got it, Ruby grinned, adding the sugar. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked over at Marley. Dad texted me. He said he saw you in the park. Marley took a sip of her tea. He did. He said you looked good. Strong. Ruby paused, searching Marley's face. Are you okay? I'm more than okay, Ruby, Marley said, walking over and kissing her granddaughter's forehead. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. As the ribs finished cooking, Marley walked over to her small writing desk near the window. She opened her leather-bound journal. The pages were no longer filled with financial anxieties or lists of chores she needed to do for Jody. They were filled with recipes, memories of her own mother, and ideas for the community clinic. She picked up her pen and wrote her final entry on the matter of her son. They ask what a mother's love is. For a long time, I thought a mother's love was a sponge, designed to absorb every mistake, every insult, every failure of her child until she was heavy and sinking. I was wrong. A mother's love is a mirror. Sometimes you have to hold that mirror up to your children, even when the reflection breaks their hearts. And sometimes you have to hold it up to yourself. Marley closed the journal. The satisfying click of the leather strap felt like a period at the end of a long, difficult novel. Ribs are ready, Ruby called out, pulling the steaming caramelized platter from the oven. Set the table, baby, Marley smiled, looking around her quiet, beautiful, hard-won fortress. We have everything we need right here. The rain tapped against the window glass, washing the city streets clean. Marley sat down at her own table, carved the meat from the bone, and took a bite. It tasted like freedom,